So I thought I'd make a quick video on some of the workshop tools and garage tools that I have. You might be wondering why it's all in my kitchen at the moment. That's because I live in an apartment, and next door to my apartment I have a storage unit, and that's where I keep all of my tools. And I haven't been through all of my tools for a little while now, so I decided to clean up the storage unit, pull everything out, and it just gives me an opportunity to show you guys the mechanical tools that I have and things that you might want to consider buying, especially if you have a Japanese import. Garage Creeper, I got this one on sale a couple of weeks ago for $29. It works brilliantly, and it is so handy if you want to work on cars, especially if you have a four-wheel drive that's already lifted off the ground. Honestly, it makes life so much easier getting in and under your car. You'll find yourself using this a lot more. And also the benefit about having something like this is it saves your back and your neck if you're doing prolonged work underneath your car. Next up, I have a trolley jack and 2 jack stands. Ideally, you'll have 4 jack stands, but I can make do with 2. So this is common sense, just to make sure that your trolley jack and your jack stands are load rated to your vehicle. So for me, my car weighs 2 tons. My trolley jack is rated to 1.8 ton, and my jack stands are rated to 1.3 tons each. Now you might be thinking, well, if your car weighs 2 tons, why do you only have a jack that can lift 1.8 tons? Or jack stands that can only carry 1.3 tons? The thing is, this trolley jack is never going to be lifting the entire car up at once off the ground. It only lifts one corner of the car up at a time, or even one side of the car at one time. So you either lift the front of the car or the back of the car at one time. A 2-ton car, if we divide that equally, even though it's never going to be exactly proportionate, you're only really lifting 1 ton at a time. So that gives me 800 kilograms of redundancy built into my jack. 1.3 ton each jack stands, again, the same thing. Combined, they can carry over 2.6 tons. And again, if I only lift one side of the car up and put 2 of these jack stands in, these are capable of supporting 2.6 tons, when in reality, it's only going to be holding up about 1 ton. Next up, I have this little tackle box. It's not a toolbox, it's actually a fishing tackle box, and it's something that I've had for years and years and years. I used to be a mad keen fisherman, but at one point I really sort of gave up on it. So I've basically used this and thrown it in the back of my car and traveled throughout Australia with. And it's where I keep all my odds and ends and bits and pieces that I might need. So let me show you what's inside. I have this little cardboard cover up here, just so that none of the loose items fall off if it does tilt over or anything. So up the top, well, it's been a while since I've been in here, so we'll go through it together. So on this side, it looks like I've got a couple of relays and a fusible link, and I also have one of those blade fuse removal tools. So that's a blade fuse. This basically goes on there and you can yank it out. And obviously I have a lot of blade fuses, so I guess I've got pretty much every amperage covered here. Next up, in this little packet here, I have what looks to be spare interior light bulbs, and these are LEDs. There's some normal standard sized or standard incandescent interior light bulbs in there as well. I've got a battery terminal cover, so a protector. I don't know where I got half of this stuff, but it's in here, and one day I guess it'll come in handy. So that looks like just a blanking switch for a Toyota dashboard. I guess if I ever plan to put any switches or anything in, or actually I have no idea what this came from, but it's in there anyway. So this looks to be all washers, so I've got like lock washers as well, or these sort of captive washers. Just a whole lot of washers, and some more washers in this little bag, as well as some plastic spacers. Over here, this is okay, so this is a switch. So I used to do a lot of wiring on my cars, especially when I had big Land Cruisers that were kitted out to go basically anywhere. So I had lights all over the roof, lights up the front, lights inside, and onboard compressed air, etc., everything. Whatever you could imagine The thing looked like it was about to be shipped off to Mars by NASA. So over here, looks like I've just got a double-sided cable management clip, couple of wing nuts, negative and a positive. Again, like I said, I used to do a lot of wiring, so that's there. This little battery here is brand new, so that would be for a key fob for a car. I've got some spare light bulbs. These are actually a 24 volt, so this is when I had my big truck, like a proper truck, not a pickup truck. I actually had a big truck, so that would be for them. Some springs, because you never know when you're going to need springs. This little clamp here, which is to secure wiring harnesses. Some plastic trimmed retaining clips, and just a few more plastic clips. I've got some headlights here. I think these are H7 headlights from a Land Cruiser. Got some razor blades, some bigger washers, some more plastic screws, and a spare radiator drain plug for a Toyota. So you never know when you're going off-road in the middle of nowhere, if something like this rips off or breaks off or snaps off or just gets old and brittle, it could leave you stranded. So just a spare one of those. And whenever I mount something on a car, if it's going directly onto the metal, I normally put some rubber feet down. So I use something like this, and I just cut it up to size so that it dampens any vibrations. And things like radiators and oil coolers and whatnot don't crack from just being shaken to bits. So on the next shelf down, I've got nuts, all different types of nuts, different sizes. Up the front, I've got smaller circlips for hoses, all different types again. I've got bolts by the looks of it, bolts with washers, bolts without washers, all different types of bolts. And on this side, some more bolts and some big Phillips head bolts. Again, more bolts as well as some high tensile bolts, so 8.8 grade. On this side, I've got some plastic spacers. These are really handy because you never know when you're going to need to space something out. Maybe you don't have the right size bolt, maybe you're just not getting enough clamping force. You can use some plastic spacers and get the job done. At the back here, I've got some radiator hose clamps, because you never know when one of your radiator hose clamps might go. I've found that I use these mostly in the middle of Australia, in the middle of nowhere, helping other people. So people that haven't maintained their cars. And in this little tray here, I've got some O-rings, different size O-rings. So different size O-rings, and I have some grommets as well. And then I've got all my electrical connectors. So I like these yellow ones. They tend to be really robust. So I've got the males here and the females over here, and some more on this side as well. And then again, some different sized electrical connectors, all different types. To go with some more electrical connectors down here. So never run out of those. And keeping with the electronics theme, I've got a pack of heat shrink, some alligator clamps, which makes diagnosing and testing things really easy. So these come in handy. I used to use these all the time. I've got some more specific zinc plated socket head screws, some more nuts and bolts, a Ziploc bag full of screws, so just different types of screws. Now this, just to prove to you how handy something like this is, used to be about half full, and over the years, helping other people out, people that are missing screws, people that need something, this bag has slowly dwindled down to what it is now, which is good because you don't just want to hold on to screws, you want to use them. A little bit of electrical tape. I have some thread tape in here and some metal fastener brackets. So, you know, if you're putting a screw in through trim, plastic trim in your car, usually there'll be a little metal bracket that the screw actually tightens down against at the back. So this is filled with those. In this pack, I've got really small nuts and bolts, washers and screws. And I have a lot of air fittings. So air fittings as well as air valves. So like I mentioned before, my Land Cruiser used to have compressed air on board. And so I always needed some air fittings on hand. And also I use these blue type connectors for diff breathers. So basically an air hose just fits in there and it locks itself in place. And you can see that I've put everything into this bag and neatly stapled it up together. So this has been sealed up for like 7 years now. Some big meaty screws as well, bolts. This is a wiring harness for spotlights, and it's got what's called Deutsch plugs. I think it's German, that's why it sounds weird. But basically this is to wire up spotlights, and I always have like a spare set here just in case something happened with my spotlights on my truck or my four-wheel drive. I could rewire them and fix them up easily. And to go with that, some more wiring for spotlights, as well as extra relays, nuts and bolts specific for spotlights. So these would fit on the bull bar or the roof rack and tighten everything down. If something did blow with the relay, I've got 2 spare relays here. I've got wall anchors. I don't know why I have wall anchors. I've got more wall anchors, this time in plastic. A length of 5 amp electrical wire. And a metal bracket. Now, there used to be 2 or 3 of these metal brackets that I had, and over time I've used them up. They're not specific for anything, they're just really strong, really thick, heavy gauge steel brackets. And what I've used the previous ones on was a broken expansion tank or radiator reservoir mount. So when you're driving on corrugations, things like that, something like this you can fashion up to basically be anything with a hammer and just a hacksaw, and it can mean the difference between fixing something or patching something and getting on your way or being stranded. So that's the last one of those that remains. Again, I've got a big U-clamp. You can put bolts down or nuts down on either side and just hold something together. If you break a suspension arm or something, or trailing arm, you can fashion something up and stick it in between this and clamp everything down and be on your way. Like I mentioned before, I used to have a really big truck, and so these are actual clearance lights for that truck. These are slim little LEDs that light up, and they take no power whatsoever, and basically there were the side marker lights on my truck. You know, the big rigs that you see with lights all over it at night? Well, this is them. And I used to have amber ones as well, but I actually ordered more than I needed, so I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 packs of red LED clearance lights. These also come in handy if you're towing a trailer or something and you're going to be further away from home or quite far away from home, and say something happens with the trailer, say it blows its trailer lights, and you're not near a gas station or anything, say it's the middle of the night. You don't want to be pulled over by the police. You also don't want someone to crash into your trailer. You can just have a pack of these cheap lights in your car and just wire them up as need be. So again, just little things that give me peace of mind when I'm traveling throughout Australia. Basically, I can repair any electronics along the way, and if something does break, I can normally fashion something up and be on my way. So super handy to have this little box. It's been fun going back into it after so many years because I haven't needed to use this for a long time. And yeah, just a handy bits and bobs tackle box. So moving on to my toolboxes themselves, I've got the smaller toolbox and then I've got the big roller toolbox as well. I started off with this when I first came to Australia. I bought this for about 260 bucks, and it was filled with just the basics, essentially. And over the years, this has been knocked about. It's actually been all over Australia and to New Zealand and back. So it's had its fair share of abuse. That's why the paint looks a bit off, because I've actually sanded it back and resprayed it myself. And then once room started becoming tight in here, I bought this roller toolbox last year. So up the top, this is where I basically keep anything that doesn't have a family. So what I mean by families is spanners have a family. They all have different sizes and different shapes and lengths, so they get their own drawer. With this, I keep all of the bulky things that don't necessarily have any family members specific to a drawer in. So I've got some oven cleaner in here, I'm not too sure exactly why or when I got this, but it would have been for cleaning some really dirty engine parts. So I guess it's handy. This is really noxious stuff, and I wouldn't recommend using this on just your bare engine block or something. But if you do have something like wheel bearings or spindles that you've removed from a Land Cruiser or four-wheel drive that's just coated in grease and you're out in the middle of nowhere, you can spray some of this on and mix it up with water and just let it soak and clean everything up properly. So next up, I have some spray lubricant in here. Sometimes it's WD-40, sometimes it's CRC, it's whatever I have left over. This time it's silicone spray lubricant. Just good to have as a penetrating fluid. Some work gloves, why not? The first thing I do before I work on a car is put on my gloves. That's why I keep them right at the top here. And you save yourself bruised knuckles, cuts, and even getting burnt just by taking 20 seconds to put these on. And on the edge here, I've got my trim removal tools. So I really recommend these. These are like 15 bucks off of eBay. And honestly, think about it. This makes removing trim so much easier than just trying to prise it apart with your fingers and using a screwdriver. If you have a Japanese import or anything unique like my car, which is what, 24 years old now, and they weren't sold new in Australia, yeah, you can get parts for them, but do you really want the hassle of breaking something? Like, spend $15, be able to remove your trim tools easily without damaging them. That way you won't have to spend weeks trying to find a replacement part and spending like $300 instead. So next up, I've got my oil filter removal tools. I've got this one here, which is a cartridge type removal tool. This removes the bottom of a plastic cartridge and then the filter goes inside. This one is just a standard sort of band type oil filter removal tool for cars. You can see it's not very large, so this doesn't really work on four-wheel drives or any Japanese four-wheel drive because the filters are quite big. What you need for that is this. So this is one of those gear-driven oil filter removal tools, and if I just open it up to its maximum value there, you can see just how much bigger it is than a normal car filter tool. So at least an inch bigger. So you definitely need this if you want to do fuel filters or oil filters on Japanese four-wheel drives. Next up, I've got some flashlights. So this is a head-mounted LED torch, invaluable when you're working on cars. And I've got a work light itself. So this one works off a couple of different methods. It's also magnetic, and there's a little hook on the back, so you can hang this from wherever you're working and get some light. Couple of rags because they come in handy all the time. Got another dirty one here which I should really throw out. It's been a while since I've been in here. So this is a ball joint and tie rod splitter, and you can also use these to remove the taper on things like the steering dampener on a Land Cruiser 80 series or any Land Cruiser with a live axle on the front. And it basically just breaks the taper instead of bashing at it with a hammer, which works 90% of the time, but when it doesn't, you really need something like this. The only tip that I have when using this is if you do undo your tie rod or your steering dampener or something like that, leave the nut threaded just a couple of turns before actually removing it, because when this does do its job, there's a lot of tension under here, and if that steering dampener, for example, was to come off, it'll come out at a rapid pace and smack you on the head. This just seems to be a pin to prick something with, I guess. I've got this here, which is really handy. It's a telescopic inspection mirror and a telescopic magnet. So if you're working on, say, your injection system in your turbo diesel, say you're replacing the glow plugs and you don't want any washers or nuts to fall into the actual engine itself, just keep this at the bottom as you undo the nuts, and this will grab onto them. I keep them in this little plastic case which it came in, just because it is an inspection mirror and I don't want it to get covered in grease and dirt. Speaking of handy things to catch and grab, I'm not sure what this is actually called. It's basically just a flexible stainless steel tube. If you push down on this end, it opens up some claws on the other end. So if you're doing some wiring through intricate bits of trim or your dashboard, or you want to push something through the firewall, this is really handy. Okay, next up you can see I've got a really big breaker bar here. Needless to say, this needs no explanation. This is just really handy for knocking off really stubborn bolts. Usually you just have to threaten the car with this, like, hey, you see this? And the bolts will normally just unwind themselves. Also up here is something that I should mention, and that is a torque wrench. Now, the difference between just a half-assed backyard mechanic versus a proper backyard mechanic who can do a job equally as well as any workshop is tools like this, having a really good quality torque wrench. Really good quality doesn't mean expensive. So back in the day, if you wanted high quality whatever, you would have to spend a ton of money. So you can get a really good half-drive torque wrench for less than $100 now. And while it's tempting to go on the internet and just buy torque wrenches for about half that price, what you really want is this, a bit of paperwork that comes with it, and that is a calibration certificate. So in here somewhere should be, or maybe not, oh, here it is, Certificate of Calibration, and it's got the serial number for my torque wrench on here. It tells you that your torque wrench is going to be precise. So if you don't know what a torque wrench is, it basically lets you dial in the exact amount of torque you want a bolt to be fastened down to. And then once you get to that torque, it'll make a clicking noise so you know exactly how much torque you've applied to a nut or a fastener. In a lot of automotive applications, you have to put down an exact amount of torque, especially when you're doing things like replacing a head gasket and you're retightening the head with new bolts, I should be hoping. Things like an exhaust manifold, things like even a valve cover. They all have a specific amount of torque that they need to be buttoned up to. And this allows you to do that. The only other tip that I have on having a torque wrench, besides getting one with a calibration certificate, is before you put it away, always zero it out. So it's never, the spring in here is never going to be under load. You don't want that. If you're not using it, bring it down to zero so that there's no pressure on the spring whatsoever and it doesn't weaken over time. And my final tip for having a torque wrench is to always put it away in its own carry case and treat it with the utmost respect. The reason I say that is don't treat this like just a normal ratchet or a wrench. Don't abuse it, don't use it to undo nuts, and don't use it like this pry bar basically, or don't use it like this breaker bar. It is a precise measuring tool, and so you should keep it in its own case, look after it, respect it, and it will still be a precise measuring tool in 10 or 15 years time. And that's basically all I have up the top of my toolbox. So we'll put all this away, and then we can get on to the bottom side, or the drawers I should say. Put my rags back. Okay, next up, the first drawer that I have is my go-to, which is normally spanners. So you can see I've got a whole bunch of different spanners here, and I do have a tip on spanners as well. Now it's been a while since I've been in here myself, and my tip is to always make sure you have 2 of each spanner. So you can see I've got 2 10 mils, 3 8 mils, or 4 8 mils by the looks of it. At least 2 12s. Looks like I've got 3 14mm spanners and 3 17mm spanners. The reason I say have more than one is more often than not, if you're working on a car, say you've got a bolt on this end and you've got a nut on the other end of the bolt, when you start trying to undo the bolt itself, the nut will just be spinning on the other end. So you can use one spanner to hold something down and then use the other one to actually remove the bolt or the nut. Now, if you are going to buy more than one spanner, I suggest buying different types. So you can see this 17mm spanner is just a standard sort of drop forged spanner. This one is a chrome vanadium spanner, so a bit higher quality, but this one is a ratchet spanner. So it just makes life that much easier. They are more expensive, but if you're going to have two of each, you can buy maybe a cheaper drop forged spanner and then buy one more expensive, better quality one. The one to abuse will be the better quality one because it'll put up with the abuse more. And if you don't want to get just ratchet spanners, the ideal setup will be a normal sized ratchet spanner and then maybe an extra long standard spanner. So you give yourself the flexibility of having much more accessibility just by having different length spanners and different types of spanners as well. So that's it for the first drawer. That's where all my spanners live. In the next drawer will be my sockets. So again, as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, I predominantly work on Japanese cars, so most of my socket sizes, most of my spanner sizes are all for Japanese metric vehicles. On the left hand side we have the extensions for my 1/4 inch drive, so flexi joints and just basic extensions, and this is my 1/4 inch driver itself. On the right hand side we have extensions and flexi bits for my 1/2 inch ratchet, which is this one here. And up top I just have a T-bar as well as an extra long extension. On the top left I've got adapters, so I can take a 1/2 drive to a 1/4 drive or a 1/2 drive to a 3/8 drive, etc. Just in case I ever find that I need a specific socket and I don't have the right driver for it, I can just use one of the adapters. And then I've got my spark plug sockets up here as well. If I don't have the right size socket, I've got a really big adjustable spanner or shifter spanner, which should get the job done. And if that can't, I've also got a substitute, which I'll show you later on. But on the bottom here, I've got my standard sort of chrome vanadium sockets. And then up top, I've got my impact sockets. So the difference between normal sockets and impact sockets, these are designed to be used with an impact driver, and they can take a lot more abuse. You can really beat up on these and they won't split or shatter. So next up, in this drawer, I've just got my impact driver. This is going to be your best friend. Seriously, I honestly recommend getting something like this, even just for the home mechanic. It makes life so much easier. When you need to do, when you need to undo really stubborn nuts and bolts, this is going to be your best friend. So if you don't know what an impact driver is or rattle gun, you know when you picture mechanics and you hear that drr, drr, drr. Sorry, bad sound effects. When they're taking the wheels off a car or the wheel nuts using compressed air, this is basically an electric version of that. And they last forever, especially if you get a decent quality one. Again, quality doesn't mean expensive. Back in the day, something like this would have been like $400 or $500. You can get really good ones now for less than 200. And again, you don't have to buy the top range. You don't have to buy the cheapest one. The best value is right in the middle. This was like $180, I think. You don't need two batteries. I just got the single battery because, again, I'm a home mechanic. Undoing stubborn nuts and bolts, exhaust manifold bolts, protective underbody covers on your car saves time, saves hassle. This rattles off bolts that are rusted on without stripping them, and it's just a brilliant tool to have. It makes life so much easier. So this lives in here, and I always forget how I had this positioned properly. Next to that, we have my little Dremel tool. So this replaces an angle grinder that I had once, and I still have an angle grinder somewhere. But basically this is a Dremel tool, or Dremel type tool. It's a multi-tool. It's basically a precise little tool with different bits that you can put on the end here. There's also this extension cable for it, so you can basically have the machine running somewhere else and grab onto the end of this hose here and just do really precise cuts and sanding work. It's got all of its little bits and pieces in this little case here, so you can cut with it, you can grind with it. It's got wire brush attachments, polishers, sanding discs, everything you need to get a job done basically. And that's what I use it for. I use the wire brush to clean up rusty bolts and bits of chrome and bits of metal. If there's a bolt that's rusted on, you can use this to basically cut through it. And it's just a nice, handy multi-tool to have. So that lives in there. Next drawer down is my drawer full of little screwdrivers and pliers by the looks of it. So I've got the standard sort of screwdrivers that you'd have. You might see this one which is bent. I've bent this on purpose. This is great for adjusting Land Cruiser handbrake shoes. Next to that we have my little Dremel tool. So this replaces an angle grinder that I had once, and I still have an angle grinder somewhere. But basically this is a Dremel tool, or Dremel type tool. It's a multi-tool. It's basically a precise little tool with different bits that you can put on the end here. There's also this extension cable for it, so you can basically have the machine running somewhere else and grab onto the end of this hose here and just do really precise cuts and sanding work. It's got all of its little bits and pieces in this little case here, so you can cut with it, you can grind with it. It's got wire brush attachments, polishers, sanding discs, everything you need to get a job done basically. And that's what I use it for. I use the wire brush to clean up rusty bolts and bits of chrome and bits of metal. If there's a bolt that's rusted on, you can use this to basically cut through it. And it's just a nice, handy multi-tool to have. So that lives in there. Next drawer down is my drawer full of little screwdrivers and pliers by the looks of it. So I've got the standard sort of screwdrivers that you'd have. You might see this one which is bent. I've bent this on purpose. This is great for adjusting Land Cruiser handbrake shoes. So you can go through the little access bung on the drum itself, or the drum that's on the disc. I know it sounds confusing, but it's basically a brake disc on the back with drums working as the handbrake. And this works really great to adjust it by having that little bend in there. Next up, I've got a multi-bit screwdriver with 2 packs of multi-bits. So most sort of common fittings you'd find in here. I've got a smaller adjustable spanner here, just in case. I've got some Allen keys in here, the most sort of common sizes. These are the Allen keys that I can beat up on basically, put them in and use a hammer on. But if I don't need to work Allen keys that hard, I've got the standard sort of pull-out multi-Allen key case. So this little plastic thingy here has just broken its rubber band because it's been on there since forever. But in here I've got some basically 1/4 inch or half, what drive bit is this? These essentially big fat screwdriver bits, and they fit into a socket. Now what socket do they fit into? I'm not too sure. We'll find out. Maybe that one there. So it goes into a 8mm socket essentially, and that way you can use a ratchet to really tighten something down or loosen something up. So again, really handy to have more screwdriver bits. I've got a tap and die set. This is a manual one which you can put into an electric drill. So basically if you cross thread something, or if you've come across something that's cross threaded and you need to put some threads back in it, this is what you use. You put one of these fittings, the right size, into this and you screw it in and basically re-thread something. Also, if you've drilled into sheet metal and you want to put some threads in, use this. So I have those. These always come in handy, and it's the little things like having these that make a big difference to the home mechanic and being able to do a really polished and well finished job. I've got a whole bunch of different pliers here. So these are for circlips when you're working in and around wheel bearings. You can use this to put the circlips on and off. I've got some cutter pliers. I don't really like these because they never really work that well. Some needle nose pliers, some stubby nose pliers, and the mechanic's best friend. You absolutely, if you don't have one of these, seriously buy one. It will save your life. These are just brilliant things. You get so much clamping force if you are trying to take something off. Even something like a toe ball on the toe bar. If you try undo the toe ball without a rattle gun, the toe ball itself will spin while the nut underneath is being loosened. Something like this can grab onto that toe ball and just hold it in place. So really handy to have. And then I have some proper cutters. So I said I don't really like these cutters because if you're doing something like really big, thick cable ties, this has a lot of trouble cutting through it, and it takes a lot of force. Whereas if you have something like this actually has a pivot in between, and it amplifies the torque of your hands. So this will cut through wire, it'll cut through anything basically that'll fit between its jaws. And if you are working on cars, you're doing a lot of wiring, you're doing a lot of tidying up, you've done a lot of cable tying, something like this will save your hands from hurting at the end of the day, and it just makes work that much easier. The one thing I've realized working on cars is if you can make your life easier working on cars by having the right tools, then you know, it's just so much more enjoyable, and you can finish the day knowing that you've done that much of a better job. And so obviously I've got a tape measure in here because measure twice and cut once, or whatever they say. But yeah, just a normal sort of tape measure in here. Yeah, you know what that's for. So I'm getting lower and lower. I think I might have to switch my stool for this little beanie bag thingy. What drawer we're at? Okay, so this drawer has all of my ratchet straps in it. Again, I used to have a big truck and I used to do transport. There's a funny story about that actually. I sold my Land Cruiser. I decided I wanted to do transport, and so I went out and got the biggest truck license that I could. And then no one would give me a job because I had no experience. And I didn't want to drive around the city just doing deliveries. I wanted to drive all over Australia. Because no one gave me a job, I sold my Land Cruiser, bought the biggest truck I could, and started my own company. Anyway, I've got some brake cleaner in here. You know what that's for. Just really handy to spruce things up. This here is, well, I really like how I put things away. It's been so long since I've opened this. This is a manual siphon pump. So if you've got some sort of contamination in your brake fluid or your power steering reservoir, something like that, you can basically stick this end in and put the other end in a container and pump this, and it'll siphon whatever fluid you have out. And a little funnel to go with that. And next to this is my big syringe pump. So I've had this thing for 10 years now, and it just works so well because I look after it. So basically there's a hose that goes on the end of this, like so. It's probably not going to go on there now because it's really cold. And you can stick the other end of the hose into like a container full of gear oil, use a lot of effort to suck it up, and then you can fill up your transfer case or your differential fluid. Or if you just want to replace your power steering fluid, things like that, comes in really handy. So that is invaluable if you're traveling around Australia, or you're just a home handyman mechanic and you don't necessarily have an air compressor that also has like a siphon pump or a siphon tool for it. So yeah, basically you can't refill your differential if you don't have something like this, or your transfer case, or your manual transmission. And then I guess because it fits in here, a really big pack of really big cable ties. These are the big boys, and I paid like 80 bucks for this pack of cable ties. This was like many years ago now. I was driving across Australia and something came loose on my Land Cruiser. It was something mediocre like the mud flap or something, and it was driving me nuts. So I stopped off at the gas station, the only gas station for like hundreds of kilometers, and I needed some cable ties. I just needed like 1 or 2 that only had this, and because it was in the middle of nowhere, it was like $80, and I was like, fuck it, I'll just buy it. So I guess, well, at least I've got cable ties for a long time to come. Next up, okay, so this is electrics and bits and bobs. Where do I start on this one? So this is an extension cable, so a power extension cable. So we'll get rid of that first things first. Make some room. We'll start from the top left. So this is Velcro tape. Again, if you're working with wiring looms, or you're creating a wiring loom, say you bought a boat and you want to rewire the thing, Velcro tape. You can run cables, Velcro tape it in place so that it doesn't move. You can do a test fit and then just remove Velcro tape. Electrical tape, more electrical tape, masking tape, foam tape. So foam tape I keep, it's double-sided, so if you want to stick on like cable management things. When I used to have like a navigation system on the dash, not on the dash, you know those Navman things that were like standalone things, and there was cables everywhere. So you can get one of those little cable management clips and just double-sided tape them on. And also I use this if there's any bits of trim that's rattling in the car. You can put this down and it basically soaks up vibrations. This is teeny tiny little screwdrivers to work on phones and things like that. So you know how phones have like the smallest screws possible? Well, this is filled with screwdrivers for that purpose. Again, in keeping with tape, I have thread tape, a little toothbrush in case you need to brush your teeth when you're out working on your cars or you want to clean something up. Liquid nails. I don't know why I have that or don't know what I use that for, but it's in there anyway. I've got a Phillips head screwdriver bit for a electric drill and 2 packs of drill bits. I've got a chisel and a file in here. I have used these quite a bit in the past. They do help. It's very handy to have. And then in keeping with the drill side of things, I've got the drill bits to make holes into metal or wood or whatever you want to drill into, essentially. This little plastic funnel thing here is, I'm pretty sure it's off a Land Cruiser. I'm not exactly sure what part it's off. It might be part of an airbox, but I've kept it just in case, and there's also a nice seal in here when I had Land Cruisers and I was driving all over the place. Again, another radiator hose clamp and hose clamp for the airbox or air ducting, air intake ducting, just in case something happened to the air intake of a Land Cruiser or something when I was driving across the country. You want to be able to get that thing airtight because if it sucks in dust, you'll destroy the engine. An O-ring, and this is a shift lever bushing that sits underneath the gear lever on a Toyota Land Cruiser. Oftentimes these disintegrate and fall to pieces and the gearbox becomes sloppy or really difficult to shift, and 99.9% of mechanics will tell you you need to rebuild your gearbox when essentially it's an $8 piece of plastic that sits underneath the actual gear lever itself. I've got a level, magnetic level back there. I've got more radiator hose clamps and 2 spare radiator caps. So you can tell I was really well prepared. And keeping with the radiator side of things, I've had this thing floating around in here forever, radiator stop leak. While I don't recommend using this, I had this just to put my mind at ease crossing the entire country. In case something ever happened, I would be able to pour this ridiculous crap in there and probably get myself to safety. Thankfully, I've never had to use it. I've got some electrical solder there to go with my soldering iron, and I've got 7.5 amp electrical wiring there. So just in case. A lot of the stuff that I have is just in case. And it's because of that reason I've never needed it. So that's a good thing. Got a scraper here. This is really handy when you want to remove the service stickers from your windscreen if you service your car yourself and you want to put a new one on. I've got a craft knife in here. I've got small cable ties, and these are releasable apparently. I don't know how to release them, but I've got some water pump and thermostat liquid gasket maker. I've got a multimeter and a crimping and wire cutting tool. And some sandpaper. So all on the bottom of this is sandpaper, different grades of sandpaper. Was that all that was in here? I'm sure there was something else. Maybe I might put these in here. And so the last drawer that I have is full of random bits and bobs. So in this Ziploc bag, there is a hard case, and in this hard case, there is rivets. So all different types of rivets. Again, if you're working on cars, if you're building off-road cars, a lot of things you can rivet onto the car when it's wheel arch flares, just random bits and bobs. Riveting is just a really good secure way to mount something permanently or semi-permanently. And at the bottom here, I've got a riveting gun. I've got a caulking gun in here and some gasket sealer maker. I've got a big bolt. I don't actually know what this bolt is for, but it's here. I have it. I don't know why I have it. I don't know where I got it, but it's there. I'm sure it'll come in handy one day. If I throw it out, I might need it the next day. You know me. This is an old dog chain for my 55 kilogram Doberman Cross Rottweiler dog, and he passed away, and I kept this chain in my toolbox. I've got a razor blade in here that I've neatly protected with some masking tape. I've got a big hammer. This is a good persuader to get things moving, and then just a normal builder's hammer. I don't know why I have the builder's hammer and not a ball peen hammer for mechanics, but does the job. It bashes things. I've got some quick grips. So if you don't know what these are, basically you can just pull them out to whatever length you need, and you can squeeze them down and they grip onto things and hold things in place while you work on them. So a couple of those. I've got a straight edge, essentially, which I guess some of the stuff is from when I was working on the house and things like that, but straight edge, good to have in the toolbox. I've got a sanding block. I've got the rivet gun, as I mentioned. I've got 2 rated bow shackles. Each one is rated at 4.5 ton, 4.25 ton, and this one is just straight 4.5 ton, I think. Rated bow shackles for 4-wheel drive recoveries. I've got a little hacksaw with a whole bunch of different blades. So again, really handy if you're in the middle of nowhere to cut things off, fashion things up, and be on your way. And works well for cutting up trim pieces and bits and bobs. And this is a big pipe wrench. So whatever you can't get undone with your normal sort of adjustable spanner, adjustable wrench, this bad boy will take care of it. Heavy duty, 18-inch adjustable pipe wrench. So the reason that I have this is one of its purposes is to tension up or torsion up garage doors, roller garage doors. You use this to basically get some tension on there. And what happened was we were due to leave a rental property of ours. Everything was fine. The house was perfect. We were about to move to a new city, actually. And my partner decided that she would reverse my Land Cruiser out of the garage. So she began reversing the Land Cruiser out of the garage and then decided to take the garage with her. And essentially the entire garage door collapsed. Everything was bent and mangled up. And that meant that I had to go out and buy a garage door tensioner and essentially spend the next 48 hours rebuilding that garage, which wasn't fun. But, you know, shit happens. And this, you know, things happen for a reason, funnily enough. This pipe wrench has then since saved my life a few times by getting things off that I needed to come off. And I didn't actually have the right tools or the right persuaders at the time. So that is my mechanical tools and my workshop tools. There's one more thing that I forgot to show you, and that doesn't fit in any of the toolboxes, and that's just a really big pry bar. So you all know what this is for. Working on suspension, working on rusted out bits and pieces, working on rubber, working with exhausts. You can really get in there and manipulate things to get them to go where you want them to be. So that's my mechanical tools.